Tonight we're going to turn our attention to Backyard Poultry. We've had several sessions in a row about the plant life on the farm, and now we'll turn our attention to Backyard Poultry. And Jim Stordahl, who's an extension educator in Clearwater and Polk County, will be the presenter tonight. So please help me welcome Jim.
Alrighty, thank you everyone. And for those of you in Bagley, one update, I apologize to you. Terry Nenick had planned to be there to be the host tonight, and something came up, so he's not there. And then my backup person was Al Paulson. So for those of you that are in Bagley and have been on a regular basis, you know Al. And he's got a city council meeting, so he's hoping to come later. So there should be handouts there for you. And if you're missing anything or you need something later on, please let me know, either by email or phone, or drop by, and we'll take care of it. So I apologize for that misunderstanding. So, well, tonight we're going to talk a little bit about backyard poultry, and I'm going to flip over to our slides now, and we'll take a few short breaks in here. If you have your handouts in front of you, you'll see that I'm going to cover this in various segments, and at the end of each segment we'll stop for questions. So, and for those of you in Bagley, again, the microphone in the center of the table, it has a light on, and you can tell when it's either on or off. So if you want to ask a question, just make sure you turn your microphones off. So, okay, with that, backyard poultry. The first slide that's up shows a picture of me in 1976 at the State Fair. This was my prize rooster, which I did not get a grand prize for. I'm getting over that, and unless Dr. Phil is in the audience, we'll just go on, because I am getting over it. But the first question, I think, obviously everybody here has some interest in raising poultry, but you know, a lot of times people wonder, well, why would you want to monkey with this? Poultry is so inexpensive at the store, you know, why even hassle with it? Well, the theme of this whole class, again, is really to produce your own food, or at least find food that is produced locally. And that's the reason to do it. The other thing is it's really quite easy. It's one of the few livestock projects you can do on a farm that is really easy and it's relatively inexpensive. Certainly flavor is part of it. That's part of the theme in this whole local foods effort, is flavor is a big part of it. And unless you've had farm-raised chicken, compare that to what you get in the store that has the consistency of tofu, you will find this to be a far superior product. So that's something to keep in mind. You're not always talking the same product as what you get in the store. It's a different product, and that'll come out as we go along here. Another good reason is it's a great project for children. If you've got 4-H kids in the family, even if you don't, if you're looking for some projects for a summer project for children, this is wonderful because it teaches a lot of life lessons. One thing that children will learn from this is oh, yes, question.
Could you put the slides on the screen so we could see them? All we see is you, and we don't have handouts in Fergus Falls.
You see me right now?
Yep. I see your slides on the monitor off to the side. Can you click yours so that you're projecting the slides?
How about the other locations? Can someone else help us? What are you seeing right now at the other locations? And Moorhead, for example.
Seeing you, Jim.
In Bagley, all we see is Jim too.
Did you make it along?
Do this one, you think?
Well,
There we are.
Does anybody
Might have
else
to go
hear a
back.
buzzing noise?
Do you see the slides now? Or do you still see me?
We can see the slides, but you've got MSU up there right now.
No, it's Fergus Falls.
We can't see you at Staples.
I am totally confused. I will go get the
Okay. What do you see now? You still see me?
You're behind the desk.
Oh, that must be very disappointing for all of you. The slides. Okay. You can.
Can't quite hear you either.
No, it's a little bit fuzzy, and muffled.
Okay, is this better? I moved the computer a little bit. Is that better? Is that the microphone right here?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, alrighty. Linda ran to see if she could find the technology person, so if you can bear with me, we'll keep moving ahead, and we should have some help here shortly to try to resolve this. We thought we had the technology figured out, but we'll work on it if we may. Of course, the last reason why to raise poultry probably is if you're interested in a more healthy product. You control basically everything that goes into that animal. First, if you're thinking about this, and if this is even your first experience with poultry, a few chicken terms would be helpful to understand, because these are things that are going to come up either as you buying poultry or as you are looking at catalogs and whatnot. First of all, I think everybody's well aware of what a baby chick is, but that's just a baby chicken. If you're looking at a baby turkey, they are called a poult, as in poultry. Guinea fowl, which I'm not going to talk a lot about guineas tonight, but guineas are another wonderful project to have, especially if you're interested in wood tick control. Guineas, or in insect control in the garden, guineas are wonderful to have around, and their babies are called keats. Straight run is a term that's often used if you're buying poultry in a catalog. Straight run means that you are just getting a mix of males and females. Basically, as it comes out, as they hatch, they're going to be either male or female, and about an equal mix of both. Typically, you'll have a few more males. A cockerel is just a young rooster. And then, of course, a rooster is the male. He's the daddy. Hackles is a term that often comes up. Those are the feathers that are along the neck of a rooster. And I'll explain a little bit more in a minute on that. A pullet is a young female. This is a young hen that has not yet started to lay eggs or is just starting to lay eggs. A hen, of course, is an adult female, and that, of course, is our mommy. These are the ones that we're going to have the majority of. Brooder is another term which strictly means a heat source for the young birds. And in days gone by, they had something that looked like a large umbrella that would cover up the birds and sort of simulate a broody hen that would hold her feathers out and to keep those baby chicks warm. So a brooder is nothing more than a heat source, but what most people use today is just a simple heat lamp that you would buy at the hardware store. So when something is going broody, when a hen is going broody, that is basically it's a maternal instinct that causes the female to want to sit on the eggs or to set on the eggs and hatch those eggs out. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Not every breed does that. Not every mommy wants to have little ones. But that's when they talk about being broody. And, if you think about being sort of cranky, if you see a broody hen, you know where that term comes from, because she's a little bit on the cranky side. There's a lot of chicken terms in life. And chickens have played a huge part in our civilization, and because of that, there's a lot of terms that have just become commonplace, but they all have their origins in poultry production. The first one, and just about every one of you that are married, you can understand this first term, henpecked. So, and the joke in my house is I'm so henpecked I molt twice a year. Pecking order, certainly, if you've got chickens, pecking order is something else that you'll understand, and there definitely is a pecking order in a flock. Now, we're going to take just a short break for some technology. They are having trouble seeing the slides in some of the locations. Can any of the locations see the slides that are up right now?
No.
Okay.
I think there's a button you can push to do it.
Well, I tried this one. It says here 1 and 5, instructor.
Yeah.
I'll try the other one.
There you go.
Oh,
Hey.
Okay, so everybody can see the slides right now?
Yes.
I just had to come
Thank
down
you.
here.
Yeah. Actually, just
Yes.
our young intern that just showed up, that's all it took. So You can tell I'm at the bottom of the pecking order here because I did not figure this out, so I apologize for that. So, cocky. Cocky is another common term, and everybody knows what that means when you think about people. But if you watch a rooster running around the yard, you'll understand where that term comes from. Nest egg. Nest egg is another one, and we often think of that as having some money sort of set aside as a way to get started saving money. And a nest egg, you often do that when you first have chickens, young pullets that are starting to lay. If they're not quite sure where to lay that egg for the first time, and you want them to lay them in the nest box, you can actually put a nest egg. It can be a golf ball, it can be a fake egg, it could be an Easter egg, but you put that in the nest, and that will kind of be a signal that this is where we're supposed to lay our eggs. So.
One of my concerns with the nest eggs were, I use Easter eggs, but what about those bright colors? Does that make any difference?
I don't think, the question is about colors. I don't think that makes a difference. I've used a golf ball, and that's worked fine too. So you can usually fool them pretty easily. They don't lay golf balls, at least not yet. Okay, up with the chickens. Once you have a rooster at home, you'll understand what this term means, especially if you don't want to. Feather your nest, another one that comes from poultry. Get your hackles up. This is a term that usually means someone is angry or frustrated. And if you have a rooster around, you'll know what this means, because when they get flustered or startled for any reason, their neck feathers will just flare out, and that is where the term comes, to get your hackles up. Fly the coop, leaving home. Ruling the roost, again, back to the rooster analogy. If you have a rooster around, you'll know what that means. Walking on eggshells, and don't put all your eggs in one basket. And if you've ever collected eggs and dropped them, like I have done on more than one occasion, you understand where that phrase comes from, don't put all your eggs in one basket, because then you have scrambled eggs. So, I would like to, now that everybody's sort of situated, we're all going to take just a 5-minute break, and Linda will be perhaps kind enough to time us. And we're going to take a 5-minute break, and I want everybody to introduce yourself to the rest of the group, and just tell us a little bit about, or tell each other a little bit about what your interest is. Are you interested in raising chickens? Have you done it before? Are you interested in eggs or meat or what? So we'll take a 5-minute break starting now. We'll be back. Okay, we're back again. Did everybody get a chance to introduce themselves? Hopefully so. And with that, we'll move on. We're going to move into breeds now, and when we get done with breeds at the end of this section, we'll talk a little bit more about, or we'll give you a chance to answer some questions about breeds. The breeds basically can be broken into two different groups. Those that are used primarily for egg production, and those actually can be separated further either into brown egg layers or the white egg layers. The other group then is a meat production type bird that are grown specifically for meat production. And then there's also dual purpose. The white rocks, and I'll talk more about white rocks in a bit here, but they're actually a pretty good one. So you could buy them straight run, and that again is a mix of males and females. And then you could butcher the males and keep the females for laying. So they're a very densely built bird that makes a great meat bird as well. The bantams, the banties, they're just a lot of fun. They're just sort of a miniature bird. They look very much like some of the other breeds, but you know, you have them around because they're fun. You typically don't have them for egg production or meat production. You could use them for eggs, but most people have them just because they're fun to have around the yard, and they have a really cool sound to them, at least the roosters. Some of the lane breeds, the breed actually is what dictates the eggshell color. So the white eggs predominantly come from a leghorn. They are the most common chicken breed today, is the leghorn. The brown egg layers are sometimes referred to as what they call heavies, because they are a heavier bird, a bigger bird. Then there's also the Easter egg ones, the Ericanas. They make wonderful birds. I have some of those at home too. They lay the eggs that either are sort of bluish or greenish. And so if you're going to have eggs and you're going to share them with something, someone else, it's always fun to have a few of those so you can have a mixture in that dozen eggs that goes out. So the egg inside is the same, and that may seem like a silly comment, but people do ask that question. Is there any difference? Are the brown eggs more nutritionally impact? Well, no. By and large, what you're going to have on the inside of the egg really is going to depend on how you feed it. So they're all on the inside. They're all the same on the inside. The brown egg layers, you know, if you go look back in history, were really traditionally more practical. They were media birds, and these birds were usually used for 1 or 2 seasons as a layer, and then they became soup or some other food product. The problem with it is that the brown eggshell is a little bit more difficult to candle, and candling is a process in which they shine a bright light through the egg just to make sure that everything looks okay. That's how they sort of separate out eggs. For those of you that have raised chickens in the past, you know that every once in a while you'll get a bloody egg or a spot. That's one of the reasons that they candle eggs, is to kick those out. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the future, but by and large, if there's a blood spot in it, it's harmless. We just cook them up just like everything else. It's simply sort of a yuck factor thing for some people. One thing that's very important about the brown egg layers is they tend to be more docile. And if you're doing this for the first time, you want something that's easier to take care of. The leghorns tend to be very flighty and sort of high-strung. The brown egg layers just don't fit the industrial model very well, and that's why they've sort of fallen out of favor. They are, as a general rule, slightly less productive. But, you know, I will make the point, too, that I think production is often overrated. You know, so much of what we are going to do in our backyard for food production, I don't think yield should be at the top of the list when you think about things. So we're interested in food quality, food flavor, and that shouldn't be considered along with production. I mean, production is important to a certain degree, but you will get adequate production with the heavies. Normal production of the heavies is somewhere between 70 and 90%. So that means if you have 10 hens on a daily basis, you should get something like 7 eggs. That would be very typical. I just talked to someone the other day that was at 90%. They had bought 20 or 30 birds, and they were getting that many eggs every day. Typically, on the first winter is going to be the most productive. So if you're sort of thinking about how many eggs you need, that's a pretty good indicator. If you're getting less than 50 or 60% production, something's wrong if you're dealing with pullets. And if that's the case, you can give me a call, and we'll see if we can figure out what's going on. So there's always a trade-off, and that's true with just about any animal. A lot of production systems, there's always a trade-off, and in many cases you're dealing with production versus something else, and in the case of birds, probably personality. Okay, leghorns, I did mention the leghorns earlier. They are excellent egg layers. That's why they're used predominantly in sort of the commercial laying houses. They do have white eggshell color. They do, however, tend to be high-strung. And that's why I don't really care to recommend these for someone just starting out, because they're going to drive you nuts. And I also find that many people that grew up with chickens, if they don't like chickens, and I ask them why, they probably had white birds growing up. They were, as a child, getting chased by chickens, getting pecked by chickens, and probably was a leghorn. So that's why, especially if you have small children around, I just assume you didn't start out with leghorns. They are good foragers. They're very numerous. If you want to raise your own baby chicks and have something go broody, that's where she wants to sit on the eggs and hatch them out, then a leghorn is a poor choice because they don't go broody. If you're in a commercial chicken house, you don't want the chickens going broody. So that's why it's good for commercial, but not a good choice for the first experience. Buff Orpingtons, buff simply refers to the color, and the picture up on the slide, sort of a golden color. You can get other birds with the buff designation. The Orpington, it's an English breed, a very dual-purpose breed. It's considered a heavy, although the birds aren't real large. They lost popularity because the skin color is different. It is white, and we have Orpingtons at home, and we've butchered them, and it's just, it looks different than what you're used to seeing. You're used to seeing sort of a yellow skinned bird. And when you see one that's white, it's like, well, what's wrong with this? Well, nothing. It's just that's a characteristic of the breed. They appear to be very heavy because they've got a lot of feathers, but if you grab them, you know, they're sort of the proverbial rubber chicken underneath. There's not a lot to them, and they're not a great meat bird. But if you don't have real warm housing, these are a wonderful bird to have around because they do tolerate cold temperatures. They're wonderful foragers. They're very docile. I mean, they can become pets. They're brown egg layers, of course, and they are very apt to go broody. So I'm sort of one that encourages multiple breeds in a flock. And the broody ones, if you want to hatch out some chicks, and certainly you don't have to do that, but if you want to, it's nice to have some. And you can get Orpingtons in different colors too. Buff is just the most common, but they do come in other colors as well. Plymouth Rock, they are probably one of the most common ones, and they come in a variety of colors. The Barred Rock is in the lower right-hand corner. That's sort of a striped one. The White Rock, I mentioned them before. They're the pure white ones. They look a little bit like a leghorn, except that they lay brown eggs, and they're much meatier. Very docile. They will show broodiness, so if that's your goal, is to have some broody ones, they're a good one. Very good mothers. They're a great dual purpose. They tend not to be aggressive, so another wonderful choice. We have a variety of rocks at home, both the Barred Rock and the White Rock, and I love them all. So, Rhode Island Red, they're a wonderful choice for the first time, wonderful choice for any small flock owner. They tend to be very good layers. If you're interested in production and maybe selling some eggs on the side, the Rhode Island Reds are wonderful. They are reportedly will tolerate sort of more marginal diets, so if your housing isn't great and you want to let them roam around the yard and kind of fend for themselves, a good one to have. I have not had this problem myself, but some of the males may be a little bit aggressive, and that's not always an ideal thing to have, especially if you've got small children around. We've had aggressive birds in the past, but my wife has found that a plastic baseball bat works wonders to put them back into shape. So they will show broodiness, but if they're really good egg layers, and there's some strains that are better egg layers, they probably aren't quite as apt to go broody. So again, I kind of go for the shotgun mixtures myself, and I sort of like to recommend that, partly because it's just wonderful color when you look across that flock. The Polish birds are they're just a really fun bird to have around. These are more sort of a lawn ornament. You don't have these to lay a lot of eggs. They'll certainly lay a respectable amount, but they're not going to be your top producer. They're really an ornamental bird. They produce white eggs, and you have them because they're beautiful. They have this unique crest and this mop on the top of their head that sometimes can create vision problems, but I've had a few of them in the past, but I don't have any right now. But again, you have them because they're just sort of a novelty. Aracanas, I mentioned these earlier. These are the Easter egg chickens, and they're named for, they come from Chile, and they have the beautiful colors, blues and greens and whatnot. So if you're going to do some shotgun approach to picking breeds, I definitely would include some of these because they just add color, and they're really quite good egg layers too. Very hardy birds. So if you've got, housing that's not great and kind of cold, definitely include some of the Aracanas in the flock. The Australorps, black Australorps, these were developed in Australia, and they're actually, they are very good brown egg layers, relatively meaty. I don't butcher too many. Most of the hens that we have, when we're done with them, we usually either can them or have one of our Amish neighbors can them because there's not a lot of meat on them, but it's very flavorful. The cool thing about these is they have this incredibly beautiful appearance. They're a black bird, but they have this beetle sheen to them that when they get out in the sunlight, it's almost iridescent. They're just a beautiful bird to watch. They're a wonderful dual-purpose bird. They will go broody, and there was actually at one point before the Leghorns took over the production system that these actually held the world's production for the most number of eggs in a year. And I think it was like 300 and some eggs in 362 days. So they can be very good egg layers. So one of my first picks actually on the farm. New Hampshire Reds. Most people don't have New Hampshire Reds around. You certainly can. They're a great dual-purpose bird. They're probably most famous for that. This is some of the genetics that's used if you buy a hybrid called a production red. And I'm going to talk about those in a minute. But these have their place more as part of a breeding program. So if you have production reds, which is a sex-linked type bird, and I'll talk about that here in a minute, but that's the half of the genetics behind that. So they make a nice bird as well. They are a little bit smaller than a Rhode Island red. And the roosters, as you can see, they're a very colorful bird as well. Sex links, if you're interested in growing or having a flock where you want to sell some eggs too, so you're kind of interested in production and you want to make sure that you get a lot of eggs, certainly sex links are ones to consider because they're very high production, maybe not quite as good as Leghorn, but probably very close to it. And they're typically a cross between common breeds. The black ones might have some Australorp in them. The red ones certainly have some New Hampshire. They may also have some Rhode Island red. But if you look in the catalogs, they come in different names, but they're all sort of the same thing. So the golden comets, the golden sex links, they're sort of a reddish bird. They look like a Rhode Island red or a New Hampshire, but different companies call them different things. But they're basically the same thing. Black Star would be a black one. They're a little bit smaller, but a very good egg layer. And they call them sex linked because the color of the feathers is linked to whether they're a male or a female. So when they're first hatched, you can tell who are males and females. And in other breeds, that's very difficult. If you're hatching your own, it's very difficult to tell males from females. There's a system to do it, and I don't know if I could do it as they're young. The best way to do it as they get older, it soon becomes apparent who the roosters are because they're misbehaving in some respect. Meat birds, I'm going to switch to meat birds here, but the meat birds, they are bred specifically for meat production. So they certainly can lay eggs, but that's not why they've been placed on your farm most likely. And most of the meat birds are a cross. They're a hybrid as well too. They're very fast growing, and that often comes with a price. And you can manage this a little bit with feeding, but they tend to have more leg problems. If you allow them to have all of the food they want, I mean, their head is in that feed bunk constantly. And you can make some changes and you can manage that, but if you allow them to have all of the food they want 24/7, chances are you're going to have some birds that sort of are crippled because their legs just can't keep up with the weight that they're putting on. So, and I've had these die of heart attacks too before you get a chance to butcher them. So, yeah, the question was, do we butcher them? We didn't because I didn't catch them that quick. So, so you can manage that with feeding, and one very simple way, and there's more detail to this, but just very simply what I do is when I do my evening chores and I'm going to kind of close things up for the night, I just take their feed away. And I don't give them any feed till the next morning. And that works very well. This past year, we forced them to go outside and forced them to walk across an area to get their feed. And they were very reluctant to do this at first, but they said if they want to eat, they have to walk to get it. So you can manage that. And once they got the hang of that, they were actually much better foragers. Yeah, we have a question here. Yeah, good question. The question was, do we have the meat birds with the laying flock? And no, we separate those, largely because we want to feed them differently. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Good question. If you're just growing them all to the point of the layers are going to lay eggs someday and the meat birds are going to go to the freezer, yes, you could raise them together, as long as they had ample places to eat. So because the meat birds tend to be more aggressive. So as long as you had ample feeders, I think that would work in a small situation. So yes, once the layers start laying eggs, you don't want the meat birds with them because they are going to have a different ration at that point. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. So with the meat birds, really there's not a lot of choices. If you look in the catalog, they typically will have the Cornish crosses, and they sometimes will have one that are listed as a little bit slower growing. So we often will do that. The Cornish game hens, these were developed as really as strictly as a meat bird, and they are really the backbone of the broiler industry. Great carcass shape. They tend to have a greater amount of breast meat, and these are part of the parentage for growing the Cornish crosses. So that's where the Cornish cross, the rock and the cross come from. So the hybrid meat breeds, they can be ready in as little as 8 weeks. And just to give you some idea, that pullet that's going to lay eggs, it's going to take her 5 to 6 months before she's sort of at a point of either butchering or providing food in another form. So 8 weeks is very fast, more than twice as fast. They do offer some slower ones. They take a little bit longer, and actually you can just feed them differently to have them take a little bit more time. Yeah, another question.
So the meat birds take 8 weeks. If I got several meat birds, I'd like to stagger it out. Are they going to get too big if they're 9, 12 weeks old?
No. Question is, do they get too big? No, they won't. Certainly, and if you want to space them out, you can sort of process them as they get big enough, in a sense too. But they will grow very fast. We've got some that this past year got so heavy that we ended up having to split them in half when we butchered them because we couldn't get them in a crock pot. They were just too much meat for the two of us now. So yes, you can do that. You can let them go longer. They will get bigger. We probably had some that were over 10 pounds. So they're like a small turkey almost at that point. Really no downside. You probably could argue that maybe they're not quite as tender, a little tougher, but again, you can control that by how you cook them as well. So you don't have to do it at 8 weeks. You can kind of do it whenever you want. And again, that will be 8 weeks is probably the fastest. But again, a little bit like the production comment earlier, don't feel like you have to be in a rush to do it. The downside is they can really put away the groceries, and feed is going to be your single greatest expense. They do tend to be very lazy. They tend to be non-foraging. If you're looking for pest control around the yard to control wood ticks and things like that, these are not the ideal birds for that. There you'd want guineas or some other breeds that are better for foraging. They just want to eat. So they are going to have more problems. So if your goal is to have 25 birds in the freezer in the fall of the year, you're going to want to start out with more than that. Probably at least 30. You might be able to butcher 30. This past year, I think we started with 25 and we butchered 24. And that was a good year for us because this was one year we didn't have predator problems, at least, I guess the one we did lose was to a predator. So we'll talk more about predators a little bit. But death loss, and I'm going to spend more time on this later, but with meat birds, if you push them hard, you're going to have leg problems. You're going to have some heart problems possibly, and you're going to lose some birds before you want to lose the bird. It's kind of like, I want to control when we butcher them. You don't want them to control when they die because then you'll just lose them. So plan on some extra birds if you're interested in putting some in the freezer. They are very fast and they have wonderful taste to them, but they're certainly not as colorful. But I mean, this is sort of one version of fast food. If you want to try some other things, and I would encourage this, you could use some other dual-purpose breeds. The White Rocks I mentioned earlier, the roosters, you could harvest them as a meat bird. Even the Rhode Island Reds, they tend to be very meaty as well. So as I mentioned, you could just buy straight run and process the males. And if you're wondering, well, how do I know which are which? As they get older, it'll become apparent because the roosters develop more of a comb. The wattles, sort of their cheeks, you might say, get to be larger. It becomes obvious, and they get cocky. So you'll notice a difference as they get a little bit older. The females tend to be a little bit more meek. So, you get to a point where you want to butcher these males because they get to be sort of problematic. So these will grow a little bit slower. You'll probably have less death loss with some of the traditional breeds, or the heavies as they call them. They're maybe not quite as meaty, but there are some people that will say they have sort of more of a chicken flavor, more of an intense flavor. I can't say that I've actually tested that, but it is very, either one, they're going to be very good and very tasty relative to what you buy in the store, I think. So let's, from our other locations, are there any questions about breeds before we move away from breeds? We got one question here, Crookston.
You mentioned guineas being, good for pests. Can you share any more about that?
Yeah, guineas are wonderful for pest control. Guineas are, they're not an attractive bird. They have a face only a mother could love. and if any of you have seen guineas, you know what I'm talking about. But they have some wonderful attributes. If you don't have a dog, they tend to act as sort of a watchdog because they will make noise when a stranger comes into the yard, which some people find annoying, but they don't do it constantly. They sort of alert you that there are other critters around, hawks or whatever. They will alert you to things. So they're sort of a watchdog. The other place they're used is in gardens. If you're interested in pest control, if you've got problems with potato beetles and so forth, the huge advantage of guineas is that they will control insects and they will not scratch like a chicken does, and they will not, so they don't rip up your garden plants. They just pretty much go around and they're picking up bugs. So they're wonderful in that respect.
I had a question, Staples. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
All right. On the dual purpose breeds, do they not gain as much weight per pound of food that you feed them? And what can you give me, what roughly it would be a conversion, I guess, or?
That's a wonderful question. He's asking about sort of feed conversion. I'm not sure. My sense is that their feed conversion may be a little bit better, but I think the big advantage is that they just have such a much greater appetite. They can just put more groceries away in a short amount of time. They might be a little bit more efficient, but that's a wonderful question, and I'm not absolutely certain on that. But I will talk about sort of how much feed it takes as we get along here just a little bit further. But let me ask one more question on technology here. Now, I just made a change here at Crookston. Do you folks see me, or do you see the slides?
We see the slides.
You see the slides, okay.
You see the
Then
slides?
let me make... Okay, now do you see me?
Yes.
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 All righty, now I know how to control this. And, okay, we're going to go back to the, okay, any more questions?
Yes, I have one more from Staples.
Okay,
If you get mixed breeds, like 3 or 4 different types, what are you gonna end up with? Do they breed together, or?
yes, yeah, good question. What happens when you have a mixture? If you have a rooster in that group, you will get crossbreeding that'll going on. And that's kind of where, 3 years ago, we bought the chickens, the hens that we have right now, and we've allowed them to crossbreed. And so some of our replacements, if you will, are crossbreeds, and they're sort of a Duke's mixture. So nothing wrong with that, but yes, they will cross, and you'll get very different color combinations. We have a rooster that is white, but his father was a black Australorp. And I would have expected that black coloring to come through, but there's just a couple of spots on him that are actually black. He is predominantly white, and his mother had to have been a white rock. So black Australorp father and a white rock mother, the rooster that came out of that is actually white in color, which I wouldn't have expected. I would have thought, but maybe if we'd had another set of eggs too, maybe there would have been other color combinations. So, good question.
How about food-wise? Do they end up predominantly tending to eat more food? Do they go to the meat type, or do they go to the egg layers, or how? do you have any information on genetically where they would go?
I'm not sure I really understand the question.
If you had a bunch of ones growing for just predominantly for eating, for meat, and you have, let's say, 20 for egg laying, and they're not real eating a lot, do you know what you'd end up with after a year or two?
Yeah, certainly that would work. The only problem would be when you get to the point where the ones are laying eggs, you would not want to be feeding them the same because, and we'll talk more about feeding in a bit, but certainly you could do that. You could raise them side by side if I'm answering your question the way I think I'm supposed to.
Well, I was just curious. If I'm probably creating more of a problem than anything, I'll probably just stay away from that. Thank you.
Any other questions from any other locations? Okay, then we will go on. There we go, back to the slides again. Okay, we're going to switch to housing now. Housing, really limited only by your imagination. What you really need is you just need some protection from the elements. You need to get them out of the very cold weather. But more importantly, you need to protect them from predators. Predators are probably going to be your biggest production problem. I'll talk more about predators later. Comfort, you know, I like a coop that has natural light because I've had both. And if you watch the hens where they have natural light, especially this time of year, they will seek out that light. They love to be in the sunlight, and they sort of bask in the sunlight. So it's best if you can have some windows on the south side. It's helpful if you have electricity in the building. You don't have to have electricity. I know some small flock owners that do not, that just have a small shed without electricity. I'll talk more about that in a little bit, but basically it's so you can have lights not only for your own ease to get in and out of there in the dark, but also so you can keep the water from freezing, so you can have some kind of a heater. But you don't have to have it, so don't let that stop you. If you've got something that would work and it doesn't have electricity, don't let that stop you. Ventilation, on days like today where it's very warm, I do not have automatic ventilation. I've got natural ventilation in our small coop, and so I have to open that and close that manually as the weather warms up. It's not a big deal, but it's something you have to pay attention to. Certainly you could use a thermostat and run an electric fan as well. One of the common things people want to know is how much room do they have to have. The organic standards, and I don't know if that's should be the standard for you to follow or not, but it gives you a pretty good idea. They suggest 3 to 5 square feet per bird. And I'm going to switch the camera back here for a moment just to illustrate. 3 to 5 square feet per bird. And if you can all see me, I'm holding up a sheet of paper. In a commercial setting, in a commercial laying house, a layer in that facility has this amount of space to live its entire life. So in a caged bird situation, they have very, very little space. So that's a definite problem. 3 to 5 square feet is basically just for nighttime and for housing. I sort of encourage people to let them get outside as well, so they have far more space. Obviously, when you're starting them as chicks, you need very small amount of space. I mean, something the size of your bathtub will work to start 25 chicks without any trouble at all. So in housing, basically, you just need an area that hopefully has some natural light. You need some place where you can feed them. A roosting area, they like to roost. If you have a building that has rafters, they will fly up into the rafters and they will roost on the rafters. If you give them something that looks like what your clothes are hanging on in your closet, if you give them a rod like that, that's what they really enjoy. And they enjoy being up a little bit off the floor. They're not at all adverse to flying up a ways. So I have mine up about 4 or 5 feet off the ground, but I still have some that will fly up into the rafters and roost at night up there too. So interestingly, when they roost, actually, they clamp on to the rod that they're hanging on, and as they settle down onto their sort of their haunches, it locks their claws into that so they don't actually tip over. So sort of a lock and load deal, and they're very content once they're roosting. A dust bath is not essential. If you put one in there, you can use wood ash if you burn wood at home. We've done that, and they love that because they don't have a way. They don't clean themselves like some birds will go in a mud puddle. They will use dust, and sometimes you'll see them on the gravel road in the driveway, and they're laying there, and you'd swear they're having a seizure. But it's not a seizure. They are just taking a dust bath. So as far as bedding goes, just about anything. In my nest boxes, I use wood shavings, but you can use straw, you can use ground up cobs, you can use a variety of whatever you have. When you have nest boxes, you can either make them, you can actually buy them if you want, but you don't have to do that. You can make something pretty simple, and you only need one for every 4 hens. And then, of course, you need something to provide water. One of my friends that does not have electricity, he just has a couple of pans that he brings in, like a pan you'd have out of your kitchen. He pours water in, the chickens drink from that, the water freezes overnight, and he just dumps it out the next day and refills it. In ours, I do have electricity, so we have just a heater below our water, and it keeps the water basically from freezing overnight. If you've got handouts, you can take a look. I've got a picture of just sort of a general layout.
We don't have any today. We'll get them to you next time, or let me know.
What location is this?
So we can get them to you.
What location?
Staples.
Who
Staples,
is
they don't have them?
Oh, Staples does not have handouts?
None.
Bob, did you get the email?
No, he didn't.
Well, yeah, so you will get them. My email is on here someplace if for some reason you don't get them. And I'll put the email up again at the end. Remind me if I forget. But, oh, it is. Yeah, and Linda just said, too, that it is on the local foods, the college website, so you can go there and download it. If that's a hassle, send me an email, and I'll send you a PDF. So I apologize for that if you didn't get that. Here's just, if you were so inclined to build something, it's something that looks very much like a small playhouse. If you'll notice at the top, there's actually a cupola, and that's what I have on mine, and I just control the air inlet and open the windows if it's on a mild day. So again, a little bit more work, but relatively inexpensive to operate. The next several slides are just different examples of pictures. The 4 that are up right now, these are ones that are intended basically for true backyard chickens. If you live in town, many communities are very tolerant to having hens. If you do live in town, you probably don't want to have a rooster. But really, having some hens in town, hens are actually much quieter than having a dog. So there really shouldn't be any complaints. And the way these are built is that they are designed to be moved around the yard because the chickens, for twofold. One, you will also fertilize your grass as you go because they have a screen bottom and they're depositing the manure so you can move around. They also have a little area that they can go out and they will pick bugs, they will eat weed seeds, they will eat grass. And so the concept of moving your small little coop around is a wonderful one. If you're handy, you can build these. If you would like to have plans for one, there may be some in the resources at the end of the presentation. But by all means, if you want to have some plans for one, send me an email if you can't find something, and I will send it to you. But you can buy these too if you want to do that. Here's just some more pictures. Many of these are made so that you can actually collect the eggs without going inside, which makes it a little bit easier. You can see that on the left-hand side. There's little doors that open up, and those will go right, basically, especially in the bottom, go right into the nest box. The one above, the eggs probably are near the nest box and are sloped, so they roll to one edge. so that makes it easy for picking. Upper right-hand corner, one that's on wheels, that's a little bit larger. And if you look at the bottom picture on the right, you can see that it actually has a mesh floor, and you can see the nest boxes, how they're built along the wall as well. So very handy. Again, if you like to build things, very simple to build. This is someone has converted part of a yard shed, and you can see it's got a little cage on each side. In the back of the yard shed, they probably have walled it off and have an area where their nest boxes are located. Probably don't have a window in there from what I can see, but it does look like there's probably a wire going to it, so they probably have electricity. But if you've got a yard shed or an old playhouse that's no longer utilized, certainly that's something that would work very well. Here's one that someone has built specifically for this purpose, and you look at the thickness of the door, you can see that that's insulated as well. If you're going to build something, I guess if money is not a barrier, I would encourage insulating it, because the production probably will be a little bit better. They will probably consume a little bit less feed because their environment will be much warmer. So you can see there's a light bulb on in the inside, so they've got power. There's a small little door with a ramp, the pop door. You can actually buy now, I ran across an automatic door. So if it's a little bit of a hassle for you to go out in the morning and open that little door and close it at night so predators don't get in, there's something called, and I don't have this on my list of resources, but it's called Pullet Close. Pullet as in a female chicken, P-U-L-L-E-T, Pullet Close. So if you do a Google search for that, you'll find it. Actually, I think if you do a search for videos, you will actually see it working. And it works, I believe, on sunlight. It's solar activated. So when the sun starts to go down or starts to get dark, the door closes. In the morning, when it gets bright, the door opens. Really a cool deal, and I think it was like $80. So I'm thinking about getting one for my wife for her anniversary. So. Okay, here's another one. If you want to get really fancy, this is the chicken mobile stagecoach. You know, if you want to impress your neighbors on how serious you are about raising chickens, this is one that you can buy. Very expensive, I think, but here's some other ones where someone's built one maybe for their children, and very handy with the carpentry. Here's a really cool one made out of cedar shakes. I love that one. Here's one that's really fancy. You can see the chickens going in the front. Here's another one. Dad was trying to build the best chicken coop for his little girl there, it looks like. But that one is really fancy. He's probably an architect when I think about that. Here's more like what mine would look like if I was going to build one. Sort of a redneck one, but hey, this works as well. Yeah, you can see the screen on the windows, so something doesn't fly out or in. Here's another one that looks like they've recycled things, some old storm windows. So sort of a solar heated one, and you can bet on a sunny day, those birds are basking in the sun. Here's one that's sort of a winter scene. This one looks like it's a little bit larger, probably dual purpose. They may use it for something else. Another one of my neighbors has a fairly large shed on his farm, and he basically just took one small corner of an existing shed and put in 2 interior walls and insulated it and built a small little door for the chickens to go in and out. So, you know, a garage or some other outbuilding that you may have on your farm, you don't have to necessarily build. So, like I said earlier, it's really only limited by your imagination. So just about anything will work. Here's another sort of a neat shot of something that would work just very well. So I'll end with the section on housing, and let me switch this back here. Any questions on housing? No questions on housing. Okay. All right, we'll go on then. Okay, we're going to move on to feeds and feeding. First of all, our chickens really are seed eaters. I mean, that's their primary diet. If you give them a choice, that's what they're going to want to eat. They certainly will eat bugs. They'll eat green material. They love that, but their primary diet will come from some type of a seed product. And feed is going to be your single greatest cost. So when we think about the cost of buying baby chicks and losing things, typically your losses are early, so you're going to lose the cost of the bird. But what's hateful is to have that bird, you've already spent all the money on feed, and then you lose it. But that is sort of rare. Usually your losses are going to be on the early side. So just bear that in mind. The feed, and especially now when grain costs are quite high, but that's reflected in when you buy chickens in the store too. Their costs are high as well. Now it does vary a little bit with age, but basically baby chicks need higher protein feed, 18 up to 20%. Of course, the more protein you feed, the more expensive it is. The meat birds, especially the fast-growing ones, they recommend actually feeding them a little bit higher protein. You probably can ward off a little bit of problems. So don't skimp on the protein because you'll just have problems later on, and you don't want that bird half grown and dying of something else. It's better, you're better off spending a little more money on the front end, giving them some high quality protein feed, and get them off to a good start. We talked earlier about mixing birds, the meat birds and the layers, and the primary difference in the feed is calcium. Calcium, of course, is very important in the eggshells. So the layers and birds that are going to be laying eggs, they need more calcium in their diet. It doesn't really hurt the meat birds to eat more calcium as a general rule, but it's just sort of a waste. If you're going to feed whole grains, you need to feed grit. And grit is basically tiny little stones or pieces of stones that are sharp, and they need that for their crop. And you can feed whole grains once birds get a little bit older, but they need that grit if they're housed. If they go outside, you will notice them picking up little pieces of pebbles and whatnot. So I don't actually feed grit in the summer because they find their own. But if you're going to have them locked up or they don't have access to the outside for some reason, you're going to have to feed grit if you feed whole grains. And I encourage feeding whole grains as part of the ration, and more on that later. One question, yes?
So, feeding them whole grains versus the ground up grains, is it going to burn up and use more energy, or is it going to lower the egg production?
Yeah, the question is feeding grains, whole grains. No, as long as your protein and energy requirements are met, I like feeding about half and half. About half of their feed comes in sort of a prepared, what they call a mash, and I'll talk about that. And then the other half, I feed whole grains, and I feed sort of a mixture of whatever I have. But they do like a mixture, it seems.
Do you ever soak the grains?
Good question. Soak in the grains. If you want to have a deeper green or deeper orange color to the eggs in the winter time, one way to do that is to sprout the grains, let them get some green material on it, and they will love you for it. So I have soaked grains in the past. I'm not right now, but I am feeding mine some very green leafy alfalfa that I just have free choice in the chicken coop. And it disappears. They pick it. Certainly some of it ends up as bedding, but they will definitely eat that, and part of it, alfalfa hay, yep. Mine's just a very grassy third crop hay, just some really nice stuff. So if you have access to hay, if you don't need very many bales. Just 2 or 3 bales probably would last through the entire winter because they don't eat very much of it. But I encourage having some green material there in the winter time. Okay. Leftovers, I'm going to talk about that, but definitely yes, we'll talk about that. So the birds will definitely, they will eat their share of bugs, and they'll eat greens, and if they're outside in the summertime, they will eat about 1/3 less of the prepared feed if they have access to outdoors. So they're finding some of that. You can't totally replace their diet. You can just let them go. They will find enough, but they definitely will not do as well if they don't have the same amount of feed. So I'm a big believer in having chickens outside. I think they're just happier and healthier if they can get outside and scratch. And if you watch chickens outside, you just know that they are more content to have access to green material and running around. They will, by the way, I don't know if I say this later on or not, but they will come back to the coop. Once you raise them as chicks, they learn that's home, and their instinct is to come back when it gets dark at night. So you don't have to worry about them, oh no, I can't get them back in. They will go back in when it gets dark. That is their instinct. So chickens love to scratch, and that's one of the reasons to feed scratch cranes inside in the winter, is it will tend to keep the bedding fresher. I sprinkle the scratch cranes on the floor, and we use wood shavings for bedding, and they are scratching around, and as they do that, they're sort of fluffing things up as well. It doesn't work quite as well with straw. If you're using straw on the floor, it works if that's all you have, but it does tend to get a little bit more matted down. Wood shavings are a little bit better in that respect.
I got a question on the pigs or straw too. Someone was telling me if you use straw, you have more problems with legs or lameness or using shavings.
Do you have more problems? I haven't seen that, but you do have more problems probably with sanitation because it's a little harder. I mean, certainly you can clean it out more often then, but straw definitely will work, and if you live in an area where there's an abundance of straw, that's sort of the logical choice. Where we live, we're right on the edge of, the cropping area and the forested area, so we have access to wood shavings, and so either will work just fine.
Where do you get your wood shavings? What kind?
I live near McIntosh, and the McIntosh Country Store, they do have bags, they're like a 30-pound bag. They're about the size of a hay bale of wood shavings, and if you have like 25 chickens or something, 1 or 2 of those will last you all winter. I mean, and they're like $5 a piece. So they're not expensive. In fact, it's probably cheaper than buying straw right now. So, but just about any place that sells chicken feed will also have wood shavings bedding. And it's best to have dry bedding if you can get it, versus getting it right from the sawmill, because that's going to be wet. Okay, nutritional value. I'm a big believer in you are what you eat, and it's the same thing for the birds. The nutritional value of the eggs definitely will be of higher quality if they're allowed to have pasture. And I said this already, you are what you eat, but if you have pigment-rich greens, you're going to get those darker yolks. In fact, at deer camp last year, my son, his responsibility was to bring the eggs, and someone thought that there was something wrong with the eggs because those eggs were like deep orange. And someone thought there's something wrong with that, but no, that just means it's very loaded up with carotene. They're very nutritious, so they will create a darker colored yolk. You can get those when you buy store-bought eggs too, but they get the yellow color by feeding marigold leaf or marigold flowers. So it's sort of an artificial color, if you will. It's not from actually feeding green material. So the pigments that are going to create that darker yolk, they are richer in omega-3 fatty acids. These are the healthy fats now that we want to talk about. Certainly it's beneficial in many aspects of human health. There was a study a few years ago that was done at Penn State, at Pennsylvania State University, and they found that the eggs that were on pasture, the chickens that were on pasture, they had a lower fat, about 1/3 less cholesterol, they had 40% more vitamin A, and they had 4 times as much of the omega-3 fatty acids. And fat often gets demonized in our society today, but there are good fats and bad fats. The omega-3s are a good fat. These are the ones you want to have in your diet. So this is really, it's a good thing if you can have them outside. The next couple of slides are some graphs. This actually came from Mother Earth News. This is not truly scientific data. It's not peer-reviewed publications, but I still think it's very valuable information. And what they did was they invited several farms from around the country to submit their own eggs. They submitted 6 eggs from 14 different farms, and they did an analysis on all of the components of those eggs, and then they compared that to what the USDA says is in an egg. So in the case of vitamin E, you can see there was about 3 times as much vitamin E in the free-range eggs as there was in a caged bird. Vitamin A, about double. cholesterol, about half of what you'd find in a caged bird, and the fat was actually a little bit less. Again, the omega-3s, in this comparison or in this trial, you see that the omega-3s were over 3 times as great here, as well as the beta-carotene. And these are all components that are linked to human health. So when you talk about these eggs are going to cost you more money than buying, say the store-bought eggs on sale, you're talking about a different product. You're not talking about the exact same thing. So you can't always let price be the dictator on what food choices you should make. So if you're interested in food quality, clearly this is a superior product.
And
Yeah, question from Crookston here.
the term pasture poultry would be interchangeable with backyard chickens.
Correct, yeah, good point. Pastured poultry, basically that means these birds are able to spend a significant part of their life outside on something green. And if you can't provide it like this time of year, then certainly they can have green material. In your example, the sprouted grains or alfalfa hay or some other green material. Leftovers, salad greens, all of those things. Nothing goes to waste in our house. Everything goes through something else. So it doesn't have to go to waste.
Do you feed your chickens meat?
We do not feed our chickens meat. That's a good question. No, we don't. Basically, it's all vegetable material that we put out. Something else gets the leftover meat. Dogs or something, yeah. Okay, we'll go on a little bit more feeds and feeding. One of the questions I'm often asked is do I feed organic or conventional feed? That's certainly a choice that's for you to make. The organic is going to be more expensive. The advantage in organic is that organic will not have any antibiotics in it. And the commercial feed that you buy, they will all be listed as medicated, and that does have antibiotics in it. So if your goal is to avoid antibiotics, excess antibiotics, you can do 2 options. One would be to feed organic feed or to feed that is non-medicated. And there are a few places, this is actually kind of hard to find, but it's hard to find non-organic feed that is not medicated. But there are some places you can. It depends a little bit on where you live. In our own farm, we typically have our own, we raise some of our own grains, so we feed our own, and that is organic. And when I do have to buy it, I do buy organic. But that certainly is a choice that you can make as well. The reason, the whole issue around antibiotics is that 70% of all of the antibiotics made in the United States are fed to animals that are not sick. They are fed prophylactically theoretically to ward off illness, and that is strictly because of the conditions they're in. I use the illustration of the sheet of paper. If 5 birds are crowded into a cage and they have less than a square foot in which to live their life, they would probably die if they didn't have some other medication to keep them alive. So, and of course, for those of you that work in some area of medicine, you're painfully aware of the issues around antibiotic resistance. So I'm a believer in keeping antibiotics out of our feed, out of our meat. But it is done to compensate for the conditions that are common in large feeding facilities. When you're going to start with that baby chick, you should have at least 18% protein when they're first getting started, and usually there's instructions on when you can switch that over. I don't think I listed that. Some of the links at the end will list that. If you're not sure, let me know and I'll tell you. You can gradually reduce it down to 16% protein, and if you're wondering, well, how am I going to remember this? But if you go to the feed store, generally they're going to have a 16% feed ration, and they're going to have probably an 18, maybe a 20, and maybe a 24. The 24 is often used for some of the birds like pheasants and some of the other things. So you don't necessarily need 24, but the protein costs the money. So the more protein you feed, the more expensive. So that's the differences. Yeah, question.
Does it hurt to just maintain the 18% protein? Is it going to do any damage with
No.
your layers?
Good question. Can you just stay at 18? Certainly not. There's probably no benefit. It costs a little bit more, but there's no downside to it that I'm aware of. Good question. Okay, the layers then, I talked about that a little bit earlier, but they need a slightly different formulation. Basically, they need calcium in it to compensate for the eggs, because every time they lay an egg, they are losing some of that calcium. Now, you can crumple those eggshells back up and bring them back and feed those back to the chickens again, too. So just another form of recycling. A lot of people do that. Best to kind of crumple them up. Some people feel like if you put them in whole, that they will get used to going after eggs and they will start becoming egg eaters in the nest. That can be a problem. I haven't had that. I have had egg eaters, but if you have egg eaters, the first question I usually ask is, what are you feeding? Because if they're short on protein, a lot of times they will start eating their own eggs, and you can solve it by feeding. Definitely feed any scraps from the garden, table scraps. I tend to avoid things that are, like when I'm cutting up onion and garlic, if I have uncooked, I don't give them that just because it's a strong flavor. I've never actually tried it, but they absolutely love scraps. If you start doing it, they will run to you in the yard when you come out with scraps. So definitely, it's a wonderful recycling. Someone asked this question earlier, and the answer is, it's going to take about 18 pounds of feed to get that chick from the time you buy it until it's either ready for egg production or ready for the freezer. I guess I do have it listed here that somewhat less for the meat bird if you're trying to get it to 5 pounds before you butcher it. We never butcher our birds that light. We usually get them a little bit bigger, but certainly that's just strictly a matter of preference. You certainly can butcher them at that size. Depends on family size and whatnot. If you're thinking about layers and trying to figure out budgeting on how much feed it's going to take, it's going to take about 1/4 of a pound per day. And that varies a little bit with the weather. If it's cold and you're in an uninsulated building, they need more. They need more just to stay warm. So you will, if you don't have an insulated building, you will feed a little bit more feed. So, of course, water is very important, and provide also grit if you can. If you're feeding whole grains, provide some grit. Oyster shells if it's not in the feed mixture. But if you buy a prepared egg mash, it will have many of those things in it, and it's meant to be as a sole feed. So you don't have to provide those as an extra. Any questions? We'll stop here for a minute. Any questions on feeding?
Have you used those nipple type things for watering?
You mean the waters that they use for pigs?
It's just a little nipple that when they peck it, it's supposed to drip out water for them.
Yeah,
Put 'em in the bottom of pails.
I've never tried them. I know what you mean. I've never tried them. Anybody else in the class, has anybody tried them? No? I think you could train them to do it. I have not tried that. I use the tank type that are, that hold like 5 gallons of water. But I've used pans. You can use just about anything. You don't have to spend a lot of money. That's one point I want to drive home, that this does not have to be an expensive venture. The feed is going to be high priced. You can't control that, but you don't have to spend a lot of money on fancy equipment at all. So if anybody tries the nipple water thing, let me know. I'd be curious to find out if that will work or not. Okay, why don't we take just a 10-minute break? For those of you that we are over half done here, but let's take a 10-minute break, and anybody that needs to use the restroom or get around, and we will be back, and we'll finish this up. So please turn off your mics if you're going to visit too. All right, we'll probably get started again. Any last questions on feeds or housing or anything before we move on?
Now I've got a question on, where does the cholesterol, that's mostly in the yolk, is that a true statement?
The cholesterol generally is found in the yolk.
Now, are there omega-3s also bound up with the yolk?
Omega-3s would be contained within the fat, which would be within the yolk.
Okay, so you're pretty much going to get one with the other.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Jim, we had a question in Mavinji.
Yes.
Is a fertile egg have more nutrition than a non-fertilized egg?
Wow, that's a great question. Sort of conventional science would say no, but I also know of a lot of people that believe that they should have fertilized eggs that they're eating. The practical issue really is if you live in a community that we were just talking here at Crookston, we were talking about keeping chickens in town, and you're not allowed to have roosters, so it's a little bit difficult to have fertilized eggs. So conventional wisdom would say that there's probably not a difference, but I'm not sure that everybody believes that either. So I don't know if that's a good answer or not. Any other questions?
One other question, on medicated feed, is there like any state ordinances or anything, if you sell the chickens or the eggs on that, or for yourself even, how long does that take to come out of their body?
Good question about medicated feed. No, but bear in mind that every egg you buy in the grocery store has been fed medicated feed.
But they're tapered off, or they're supposedly at a certain level or gone, right?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think they're fed medicated feed from day one till the day they're butchered. In a conventional commercial setting.
But what if you did it at home? and just
The
started?
golden plump, I think some of the companies now advertise more of a natural bird. That's a separate product. But just a regular chicken that you buy at the store or a regular dozen eggs that you buy at the store, unless it says something different, most likely that bird has been fed a diet its entire life that contained antibiotics.
What if you did it at home and you were raising your chickens and you started for 2 or 3 weeks with medicated?
Certainly you could do that. I'm going to talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'll address that. It's a wonderful question. I'll talk a little bit about how do I avoid medicated feeds and how do I keep my birds alive. So, great question. So we'll talk about that momentarily. Okay, we'll move on. Well, I will talk about that. I'm going to talk about predators first.
I have another question.
Yes, go ahead.
It said earlier that the chickens outside, the stuff they find foraging will supply a third of their diet. Is it the same with guineas since they tend to eat more bugs than the others, or what percentage are?
You know, guineas probably would get by. They probably would do better at foraging than a chicken, and I don't know that for fact, but that's sort of my sense because they are voracious bug eaters. So I would say a guinea, you could provide feed for a guinea during the summertime, but my guess is they probably are going to get a good share of their diet, maybe half of their diet, from things they just find. I don't know that, but that's my suspicion. Okay, we'll go on. We'll talk about predators, and I will talk a little bit more about the feed question you had earlier, too. Predators, though, are probably going to be the cause of your greatest death loss. So plan on this problem. If you're going to start baby chicks, start extra chicks. And usually this problem is the worst when you have the baby chicks. Usually when they get big and they can move about a little more quickly, they're not quite as prone to it. Still, it can happen. And it can be prevented for the most part. Still, some of these critters can be awfully tough. But the real goal, I think, is to understand what your enemies are and try to prevent them. And all of the ones that I've gone through or will go through here, just about every one we have fed chickens to inadvertently. So raccoons, we've had this problem where raccoons were actually pushing through a screen window and getting in. I thought it was a cow actually pushing through the screen window. Turned off, the chickens were disappearing. But raccoons will attack at night. One common symptom, if you find birds with missing a head, that's a pretty common symptom that it could be a raccoon. They'll pull off other parts too. So, and they'll keep coming back night after night. So if you've got a dead bird and something's been eating on it, you got to sort of get on it because it'll keep on until you stop it. So, and some of these I can sort of live with. Raccoons are just, that's their instinct. They're just trying to feed their young. I don't get so upset at that. I don't want them eating any more. I don't want them eating any of ours, but I kind of understand it. The ones, some I'll share here in a minute. I'll tell you the ones that really are frustrated. But we had a question here, Crookston.
So we've had raccoons visit ours, but they pull off the head, but they've left the body.
Yeah.
Do they drink the blood?
They'll probably come back, but yeah, they'll usually kill more than one, and a lot of times they'll take their head off. In one case, we had birds, it was actually, the chickens were sticking their heads out, not the brightest critters in the world, and having it removed by a raccoon, so that can be a problem as well.
So they just take a part away at a time. I mean, when I found my headless chicken, I thought, well, maybe it drank the blood or something,
Yeah.
but...
It would probably plan to come back and get the rest.
Okay.
Okay, so raccoons, a very common problem. Fox, certainly, everybody's aware of the fox problems. Again, another nocturnal animal. They usually will take the prey. If you've got a fox problem, you don't probably know it right away because they're carrying that bird away. We talked about raccoons here. You usually will find a carcass near your yard. The fox, a lot of times the hens will make a noise when they're being attacked, but you can also sometimes tell by the manure too because they don't chew it very well, and you can sometimes find it in fox droppings. So, but if you have fox around, this would be more of a case if you live in the country. So, but usually you won't find it right away. The chickens will just disappear, and they may be taking it back to their den to feed their young. Again, I sort of understand this one. I don't mind this one as bad. We still do everything we can to protect it. Hawks and owls, we've fed them as well, and they do it more. They will attack from air. If you let the birds, chicks roam around their yard, a lot of times hawks and owls will come in. Owls will be at night. Hawks will do it during the day. There's some ways to deal with them if you have problems with it. The best way with owls, of course, is you just got to lock them up at night. And sometimes when we've lost birds, we've just left the door open and let them go in and not closed up at night. That's when we lose our birds. So it's been sort of my own fault. So hawks will attack during the day, and they will actually pick them up. And again, if you think about the size of a chicken, more of a problem when they're small than when they're large. So another way to deal with it. Skunks, we feed skunks just about every year, and they will attack eggs as well. So you can have a skunk. Skunks, you don't always know that you have a skunk, and everybody would think that you're going to smell a skunk. But we lost 15 chicks one night a few years back, and I thought for sure it was a weasel or some other problem, and I set a live trap, and lo and behold, the next day I had a skunk in it, in a live trap in the barn. So only then did I think, gosh, it would have been a good idea to tie a rope on this trap, but I did not do that, and I did, well, the skunk is no longer with us, and I did manage not to get sprayed, but if you suspect that a skunk, make sure you put a rope on your live trap. So, but skunks they're relatively easy to manage. If you lock your birds up at night, if they're protected, same thing with your hen house, skunks, they're not really difficult to avoid them. Coyotes, I don't know that we've had problems with this. We hear coyotes howling every night if we listen, so they're definitely around us. But again, like a fox, they're fairly large, so it's hard for them to get in, and a little harder for them to get at it. But certainly they are one that could be a problem. Fisher and weasel, these are the two most frustrating critters. You seldom see fishers around. I see them occasionally. They're about the size of a cat or maybe a little bit bigger. Absolutely a meat animal. Fishers will actually take cats out of your yard. They're just, and weasels, they sometimes can get into a chicken coop, and they will just kill for the sake of killing. And now I can sort of live with a raccoon that's trying to feed a young one. But when a fisher or when a weasel comes in and kills for the sake of killing, that is really frustrating. So, But again, if you have a tight chicken coop, you know, they can't get in. So that's sort of the solution to that problem. But be aware that predators are a problem. Dogs, of course, you know, some people tell me they don't have dogs because of this very reason. Yeah, so I don't know. You either got to control the chickens or control the dog, one of the two. So, any questions on predators? Okay, moving on. Predators are going to be, if you're going to lose birds, chances are predators are going to be the reason for that problem. Was there a question?
Oh, it's not me.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Question.
I just wanted to note, last year, cats are vicious predators too. I had a cat get in and kill 41 of my broilers. So guard against cats.
Wow.
What type?
Yeah, was it a feral cat or was it
Just an excellent farm cat.
Wow.
We
Yeah,
actually had-
so
we had 100 chickens
Ben
once
makes
growing
some-
up, and the 2 cats went in 2 different days, and the chickens killed the cat.
Oh.
We did cats in 2
That sounds like
days.
how it would be at my house.
Yeah. Well, wonderful point. I forgot to add cats. I told you earlier that we only lost 1 bird this year, and that was to a cat. So, yeah, cats definitely can be a problem as well.
A house cat?
A stray cat. We had a stray cat. Okay, health and disease.
My cat let Lady
Diseases
sit on there.
typically are not going to be a major problem. One of the publications, if you search for publications on poultry at the University of Minnesota, one of the prominent ones you'll find is diseases. You read that and it's like, holy mackerel, I don't want to, this is way too complicated. Everything can happen. It's like if you knew all the problems that kids would have, you'd never have children. You know, so don't sweat the diseases. Not that you can't have a disease, but you're going to lose more birds to cats, dogs, coons, and other things than you will to disease, provided you provide a good place for them to live. Coccidiosis is one that can be a problem. That's a microscopic parasite that basically gets in their intestines. It's very common with young chicks. They usually get diarrhea and they usually die. So it doesn't have to be a problem. You can get around it. Medicated feeds, the lady asked earlier about using medicated feeds early on. Certainly you could do that. You could start out with medicated feeds if you wish, and then switch away from that later. And that will control coccidiosis. The way we do it is I use probiotics. I simply mix yogurt in with their drinking water when they're first born, and I do that for about a week. And I simply take a spoonful or so in like a quart of water, mix it up, and we typically can start with a batch of 100 birds and have 97 or so of them survive, and then we'll feed a few more to skunks and cats and something else later on. But you can control the diseases. The key to that is to provide good housing. You've got to have a dry place for them, quality feed, keep them out of the elements, and you typically will not have major problems. Another one that you can commonly have is something called a pasted vent. A vent is where they deposit their droppings from. There are other more colorful terms for it, but vent is what they call it in chickens, and sometimes they will get sort of a clump on there of dried up chicken poop, and about the only thing you can do is just pull it off. So if you see a chick off to itself that just looks like it's sort of droopy, and this usually happens very young age, you can simply pull it off. It's not a disgusting thing whatsoever, and that solves the problem. So kind of keep an eye out for that. But the coccidiosis and the pasted vent usually are something that you can deal with, but sort of keep an eye out for it as well. 4-H'ers, if you're going to do something, you need to have some certificates, but that's not a big deal. So don't fret the diseases, just provide a clean, dry place for them. If you raise chicks in this place year after year, I don't do this, but you could wash it down with like a Clorox solution or something. I don't do it. I simply clean it out and I put in new bedding, and we just don't have problems. I'm a believer that they'll do better if they have fresh air and sunshine. And of course, they have to have feathers on before you can let them outside. It takes a few weeks, but I think they're just healthier if they can be outside. Focus more on the predators, and you should not have problems. But also, when you buy chicks, bear in mind, you're probably going to lose, 5 to 10%. So sort of build that into the numbers when you buy them, because it's cheaper to buy extra chicks, and usually if you lose them when they're young. Chicks are going to cost anywhere from $1 a piece up to $3, depending on where you buy, the quantity you buy, and so forth. Feeders, you can just, if you're handy, you can make them. I've even found some old things at auction sales, the old style. Actually, the old style feed trough with a board that goes across the top is my favorite type. My least favorite type is the tube type. I think they waste a lot more feed in one of those, but that's why they sell them in feed stores, because they are selling feed. So the other one that I have that I've used that is one of the best one is just an old rain gutter. I basically mounted it on a 2x4, cut a couple of pieces of triangular shaped plywood on the end, attached it so it's up off the ground, and it works perfect. And the chickens don't stand in it. You want to have it up so they can eat basically at their head height. And yeah, so you don't have to spend any money on this if you don't want to. Waterers, you can buy the commercial waters. They're probably $30 or so, but you can use basically anything that'll hold water, as long as the chickens can get in it. Yeah, we got a question here in Crookston.
Back to the feed, I'm curious, I do a lot of just sprinkling on the ground, and I'm wondering if I'm wasting feed that way, if I should take the time to build one of those rain gutter types that you're talking about?
I don't sprinkle the mash on the ground. I always put that in a feeder, but my whole grains, I do sprinkle that on the ground, and they may miss something, but boy, they're pretty efficient in finding things. Another question. Yeah, they'll find it. Even when I spill grain outside, I never worry about it because they'll get it sometime. If they don't, the wild birds will get it. So I don't fret over a little bit of spilled grain around the yard because something will find it.
Your yogurt that you
Question?
use, the yogurt, do you have to change the water more frequently?
When I'm starting chicks, I usually use a 1 quart water. So, and usually, you start chicks in the spring of the year, usually it's cool enough that you won't have problems, but you raise a good point. If it stands too long, you could have spoilage problems. So, but typically those chicks will probably empty one maybe once a day. So I'm refilling it daily. So, but I do have to wash that, and I only do it for about the first week, and then I just go to straight water. If you can get them through the first week, typically the diseases or the problems I talked about usually aren't going to be a problem after the first week. Another question in Crookston.
So back to the yogurt, first of all, what type? Do you get a live bacteria yogurt?
Yeah, I do. Live bacteria, and they like strawberry the best. No, I'm kidding. Flavor doesn't matter.
And you just do that for the first few weeks?
I do. Yep.
For all chickens?
For all chickens.
For the probiotic benefits?
Yep, I do. That's what I use instead of an antibiotic. I use a probiotic. And everyone I've ever talked to, I originally got this from a vet that works with organic production. She told me about it, and it's worked for me for years. Anybody else that I've talked to that's done it has had success. But again, you have to have clean facilities, clean bedding. If they're in a damp, wet environment, that probably won't work. But if you have good, clean housing, a warm place for them, they will be fine.
But what's the time period that you do it from?
I do
hatching?
it from the day I get them, the day they come home, they get some yogurt for about a week. And then
1 week.
1 week, and then I just go to regular water.
What ratio? Water,
about
yogurt?
a teaspoon or 2 teaspoons per quart. And there's nothing scientific about that. You put too much in and it wants to settle out. But you could feed yogurt in a pan too, for that matter.
Yeah.
They'll peck at it. So
On the water, Do you
Yeah.
add trace minerals or electrolytes?
I do not.
Okay.
But probably could, but I don't do that, but I guess I don't think it would hurt to do that at all.
Okay.
Again, the focus here is on sort of prevention instead of dealing with cure. You know, we're trying to prevent and build their immune system so they can ward off problems.
Jim, a comment in Moorhead here.
Yes.
We have used, for the coccidiosis, we've blended garlic. I know that's kind of contrary to what you've stated already, but we've blended garlic into the water, and that has worked for us.
And I would, yeah, I think I said earlier about not feeding garlic to laying hens is what I was thinking because of, and I've never actually tested this to see if it would actually alter the flavor of the egg. But I certainly would support that. Garlic has wonderful antibiotic properties. Garlic is effective on many strains of organisms, so definitely I think the garlic would work well too.
And I will note that those were young pullets, they weren't laying, so.
Okay, perfect. Yep, good point. Okay, the feed is going to be your most expensive cost, so anything you can save from the house or allow them to graze will save some of those costs. Another thing, don't do this because you think your food is going to be cheaper than what you can buy in the store. But, you know, I always ask the question, should cost be your first question when you think about food? You know, we've sort of been taught that as a society that everything has to be cheap. But I'm a firm believer in quality food, and quality food is going to cost more. So, but you're dealing with a different product. And, you know, the old adage of pay now or pay later, I'm a firm believer in that. So it shouldn't be a lot more expensive than what you buy in the store, but don't assume that it's going to be less cost, I guess. It definitely will be tastier. You saw some data that I showed earlier. It's going to be more nutritious. So you're talking about a different product than what's in the store. And animals are what they eat, and we are what we eat. So if we're feeding that chicken differently and we're eating that product, whether it be the eggs or the meat, you're getting a more nutritious product, and that has an impact on human health. In fact, you know, I firmly believe too that good nutrition is hard to see, you know, because we can see things, we taste certain things, and we know we all love things that taste wonderful that aren't necessarily good for us. So you have to think about what's in the inside of that, and then sort of based on the nutrition. One thing I mentioned earlier that I think I forgot when I talked about feeds, to boost the omega-3 fatty acids, you can feed flax. You can feed ground flax in your ration. And our winter ration is 7% ground flax. And we get it ground. So, but you have to grind it because they will separate out the flax seeds, I've found. I tried to feed it whole one time, and then they will separate it out. It must not have a wonderful taste. Now, that has been proven by Nebraska State University that will boost the omega-3 fatty acid content of the eggs. So you can do that simply by adding flax to it. And I even see now some of the big players are starting to do this too. I don't do it during the summer, but our chickens always have access to green material during the summer. So they get that omega-3 fatty acid benefit from the green things they're grazing on. So I don't feed flax because ground flax is expensive. So I only feed it in the winter. You could also possibly substitute some other green material, sprouted grains. The alfalfa hay will help, but the flax definitely will boost the omega-3s. Egg production, just a few notes on that. Those pullets will start laying about 6 months, 5 months. If you start chicks in the spring, by Thanksgiving or so, you will have eggs. Generally, they produce the most eggs the first 2 years. The third year will decline. It takes about 25 hours to make one egg. And so they don't necessarily lay an egg a day. Normal production is 60 to 90%. I've got some 3-year-old hens right now, and they're probably doing 50% right now. So they need to be converted to soup. You don't need a rooster unless you want fertilized eggs or you need an alarm clock. Lane birds, they are fed differently. I mentioned this earlier. You need more calcium in the diet. You can do that with oyster shells. You can also feed their shells back to them. If you buy a complete feed, that does take the guesswork out of it. Basically, it has everything you need. We do sue some of our own feed, but for most folks, it's just simple as just to buy that and then feed some scratch grains too. Nest boxes, you don't need one for every bird. Basically, the ratio 1 to 4 is adequate, and most of the birds will lay their eggs in 1 or 2 nests. I've got a 6, it has 6 nest box, but typically they only use half of them. You'll find 5 eggs in 1 box. So you don't feel like you have to build a whole bunch of stuff. Generally, the mixture that you buy is called mash. Basically, it's just sort of a finely ground feed, so you can't really see the feed particles. It's quite fine. Scratch grains, I love whole grains and I like mixtures. And we do kind of whatever we have on hand, but they love mixtures. They're not crazy about oats. Oats is a little bit fibrous for them. So if you do feed a lot of scratch grains, though, you may have to adjust your mash ration a little bit. I do feed a little higher protein because half of my ration is in scratch grains, which is lower protein. So I sort of compensate. Good source of water. Dust baths are helpful. Generally, if it's hot, you should pick the eggs every day, sometimes twice a day. When it's cold, if you're worried about freezing, once or twice a day. We pick our eggs only once a day this time of year. Some of the eggs will be dirty, and we get this question a lot. What do you do about those dirty eggs? If you're going to sell eggs, there is a procedure that you're supposed to follow, set out by the USDA. If they're not dirty, we do not wash our eggs because the chicken has this magical ability to put a natural antiseptic on the surface of the egg. So it's intended to protect the egg. So if that egg is not dirty or even mildly dirty, we do not wash our eggs. We're just careful on how we open them. So if you keep those nest boxes clean, you'll have cleaner eggs. The manure, of course, if you're a gardener as well, it makes absolutely wonderful composted fertilizer, but be sure you don't put raw manure on garden crops like lettuce that you're going to eat. That's just sort of a poor idea. It's best to use last year's manure on your garden and put it on in the fall of the year. Processing the birds, you can butcher them yourself, or you can usually find some neighbor that's willing to do it. There are some mobile units around. I know in North Dakota there's one where you can actually rent it and bring it to your farm if you're doing this on sort of a small commercial scale. Lakes processing in Detroit Lakes, I think there's one in Ashby, maybe still 2. Maybe someone else knows better. But there are a few places around. In our area, we've got several Amish families that are willing to do that. So if you're going to sell them, you have to go through a USDA improved plant to sell the birds interstate, but if you're doing it for yourself, it's not very complicated. So getting started is really easy. You're halfway there if you've taken this class. The only thing you really need to decide is, do you want to do this for meat or bird or for eggs, or do you want to do it for both? Study the breeds, try different ones. I really like the mixture because I think it's just cool to look at all the different colors. There's lots of websites. I've included some at the end of this talk. Usually you can find your chicks locally. Just about every elevator in many of these small towns will have chicks for sale. If you can't find them, you certainly can buy them online. There's catalogs. Murray McMurray is a common one. Stromberg's. There's 3 or so, or maybe 4 in Minnesota and Iowa. So you don't have to go very far. If you have trouble with that, just let me know, and I can steer you in the right direction. We got a question here in Crookston.
How about buying the eggs? I'm interested in several of the breeds that you mentioned, but I'd like to incubate the eggs myself.
Yep, buying eggs. You can buy fertilized eggs. I think, I'm not sure. You'd have to look. Stromberg's and some of those, do they have eggs, fertilized eggs? Yeah. So You could, if you're interested,
Oh, you order them and they mail to
you order them and you can get them that way, and then you can hatch them out yourself. So, one thing you do need, you need some type of a heat lamp to get them started. We start ours a little later in the summer, so it's not quite as important, but people like to have chicks first thing in the spring, and you do need a heat lamp. There is a process for reducing temperature on them, but if you need help with that, let me know. You need a small brooding area. A lot of people use an old water stock tank, but an old bathtub, just about anything that'll keep them from jumping around and running around is all you need. So they can get out pretty quick. So with that, are there any final questions? And I'm going to put up some resources. If you have a handout, you have these. If you don't have a handout, I'm going to go back to the very beginning, and I will list my email and my toll-free number. So if for some reason you didn't get a handout and you don't think you're going to get one in the mail or some other way, let me know, and I'd be happy to email you a PDF file, which is a much smaller file. So any
Jim?
last questions?
Jim in Thief River here, we have a question.
Yes.
Can you, where do you find the cleaning the egg process that you mentioned?
Sandy.
Yeah, I think maybe Minnesota Department of Ag, if you go to their website, they might have something. If you did a Google search for egg cleaning procedure or something like that, I'm almost certain you'll find one. In one of the resources at the end, I'm almost certain there's one website that has links to that. The basic rule is that you're not supposed to submerge the eggs. They're supposed to be cleaned with like sprayed water, which is kind of hard for you to do on a small scale. So there's different devices you can buy. There's one with a 5-gallon bucket where you actually put your eggs in and then you add an air compressor to it and it actually bubbles it. Works fairly well. I don't know if that's legal for selling eggs or not, but if you're going to use them for yourself, that works really well. Any eggs that we have at home, I just do it in the sink. You know, so if they're dirty or we're going to give them away. Other questions? There's a ton of research, or not research, but there's a ton of resources on the internet. I mean, the whole concept of backyard chickens, there's a lot of interest in it, and you will find a great deal of resource. Certainly feel free to call me or email me if you can't find something specific, or if you have some other specific questions. I get questions every once in a while on, you know, what's wrong and what's going on, and I certainly don't have all the answers. We don't have a poultry specialist at the university right now, at least one that deals with small farm flocks. She moved to Kentucky, but she's still very willing to answer questions. So if you get stuck and I can't find the answer, in fact, last week there was a question floating around about bloody eggs, and so we can get the answers for you if you've got some unique problem. Any final questions?
Yeah, at what age do the chickens know to return to the coop?
Usually by the time they have feathers and by the time you are done using the heat lamp, they're pretty aware where home is. So once they have enough feathers that they can go outside by themselves, they will come back to that spot at night. So it's best to start them where you want to keep them, wherever their home is. So, you know, if you're tempted to start them in the house and then after a month move them out to a chicken coop, you're more apt to have trouble. So I would start them where you want them to be at home.
Are there any type of diseases that can be humanly transmitted, or is that only on a big scale?
Are there any type of diseases that what?
That can be transmitted to humans, like bird flu or anything like that, or is that
I'm not aware of any. I guess I don't know the answer to that. It's not something I worry about, I know that.
Thank you.
So for those of you that did get handouts. There is an evaluation form. Please let us know how we're doing. Also, if you have ideas for topics, we have one more session next Tuesday night. That will have an emphasis on two things. We'll actually have two speakers next week. One will be on how you take your idea of local foods and take that to sort of a small commercial scale. And then also, we're going to talk a little bit about Farm to School, and that is a program in which we're working on getting more local foods into our local school systems. So join us, please join us. Next week, we have one more week. Also, if you have ideas for future topics, we've been encouraged by the participation in this class, and so it's very likely we'll do it again next winter. So if you have ideas, please let us know.
No, this is a good hand.
Would you put up the resources again?
Still want it?
We don't have handouts.
All right.
If you don't have a handout, I will put my email and my phone number back up here.
Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Oh, okay, resource page, sorry, I'll go back to that. There we go. Can you see it? Okay.
Yep, thank you. Yeah.
This is the fruit one, Mel, does it matter?
Is that right?
Yeah, it is.
Well, it must have been okay, they just put fruit.
I guess that you should end it.
No.
Put,
We can make
put chickens on top of it.
Well, we will, if there are no further questions, thank you everyone for attending tonight. Feel free to contact me if you have other questions, or and please join us next week. And again, thanks for joining us, and we will sign off.
Thank you.